Greetings and welcome to the 2022 New York State Cybersecurity Conference. Thanks to the conference sponsors, the State Governor and the CIO, and to Jessica Smith and the organizing team. I'm Dr. Yogesh Malhotra, Yogi, as CEO of New York State Venture Capital and Private Equity Firm, Global Risk Management Network, LLC. It is my privilege to be here with you. With today's cloud computing as global, agile, resilient, on-demand, infinitely scalable utility business focus, we share how you can implement well-architected, zero-trust, hybrid cloud computing beyond lift and shift. Our related technical focus is on cloud-enabled digital innovation at scale with infrastructure as code, DevSecOps, and MLOps. Think of this presentation as the cloud computing CEOs, CTOs, CIOs, CFOs, and CXOs reference guide, a digital reference guide for your teams advancing your cloud computing practices journey. You can download this guide as PDF and video documents from my publications and LinkedIn pages shown on the slide. My email, dryogeshmalhotra@gmail.com, is also listed on the slide for any follow-up communications. With about 400 slides, half of them in the appendix, as Amazon Web Services AWS partner, I outline a vendor-agnostic, pragmatic, applied foundation for advancing your cloud journey. We provide you with a practical roadmap for initiating, advancing, and accelerating your cloud journey, recognizing why you are in it, what are the best options available, and how you can best benefit in your applied practices. I'm grateful to all the AWS partner trainers and many other trainers from the 4 different providers. These trainers serve as ambassadors of the firm's value systems, underlying the design of the greatest e-commerce machine and some of the largest technology companies in the world. Therefore, we'll look at cloud computing in terms of computing as a global, agile, resilient, on-demand, infinitely scalable utility. But let's break it down. We need to start thinking beyond technologies to capabilities, not technologies that we own, but capabilities that we can acquire and dispose of based on demand to scale at the level we need to, based on the latest and greatest innovative technologies we can access. Therefore, we want to advance beyond what is undifferentiated heavy lifting with often zero or negative value to positive business performance value. Therefore, in terms of agility and resilience / controls and governance, we want to focus on how to derive the greatest business value from technology in terms of scalability, innovation, and global reach at the lowest cost on a sustainable basis. Therefore, we'll break our presentation down on what are the current cloud computing platforms, that's the context. And the focus is how to best build enterprise cloud computing, that's the solution focus we have here. These specific what and how are with respect to the problem we have posed at our last New York State Cybersecurity Conference on why we need to build agile, resilient, self-adaptive systems, the practices we have pioneered going back 25 years ago. And we had discussed these in terms of quantum, dynamic, and adversarial uncertainty. Therefore, see Appendix D if you would like to review what we have discussed in the last New York State presentation, as well as multiple other more recent global keynotes and presentations, which advance those practices further. Therefore, coming to our focus on how you can implement well-architected zero-trust hybrid cloud computing beyond lift and shift. The Global Risk Management Network LLC was born as BRINT, Business Research in Information and Technology, going back to the beginning of the World Wide Web as the pioneer of business technology, which coined the BizTech term and pioneered global digital transformation, building the world's first, foremost, and largest global digital transformation network, written and followed about by people like Bill Gates from Microsoft, CXOs from companies like PwC, and CIOs from Army, Navy, Air Force, and top leaders and commanders from allied forces. Our current focus is on saving you 90% time and cost on building global, agile, and resilient enterprises, networks, platforms, and technologies. In that context, we focused on the advanced technologies. From this slide, you see we have been fortunate to work with some of the largest companies in the world across Silicon Valley, Wall Street, Pentagon, and global domains, including world's largest technology, finance, and defense organizations, as well as largest governments, including the US federal government, at the invitation of the Veterans Administration of the USA. We have also been fortunate about written as benchmark in most top-tier business and technology publications worldwide. Therefore, jumping on to today's topic, we're going to focus on how to build smart automation, cyber resilience at scale. Traditionally, there has been a tension between whether you can have resilience or agility. And that's where the focus of cloud computing is today. And we can see remarkable progress, which all enterprises can benefit from. Therefore, focusing on what we call the network-centric cloud computing, we shall advance the business technology leaders' understanding about the key cloud computing implementation, migration strategies, and related technological architecture issues to enable their systematic cloud adoption. The current slide shows you our journey over the last 25, 30 years, starting from the world's largest digital transformation network with the top digital sites, search engine, social network, to our more recent focus having advanced practices across Silicon Valley, Wall Street, largest hedge funds with $1 trillion assets under management, more recently having built the thought leadership for the Pentagon Joint Chiefs of Staff, where I was also fortunate to be invited for the top science roles for the Air Force and Pentagon. Moving on, we will focus on these three questions: what, how, and why. And the specific focus again is in terms of agility, which is built on automation, smart automation, going back to AI, machine learning, and what we now know as deep learning, neural networks, as well as resilience in terms of cyber and technological resilience. Therefore, in terms of agility, we have about a 30 years track record of building and leading worldwide CEOs-CTOs-CXOs practices in AI, machine learning, deep learning, quantitative, cyber, crypto, quantum computing, with more recent presentations and advisement of CEOs-CXOs teams for programs like Princeton and MIT, and going back to the beginning of the web, to early adopters of our networks like Goldman Sachs. Our journey began from the Santa Fe Institute in 1995, where we contacted the pioneer of genetic algorithms about building self-adaptive complex systems. He wished us good luck. And from that point, the inspiration he gave to us inspired us to build the self-adaptive complex systems and chaos theory, of which Santa Fe Institute is known as the Nobel Prize brain power think tank. We were the ones to pioneer global practices in that specific area, written about by worldwide publications like Wall Street Journal and the New York Times, even leading practices at Santa Fe Institute at that point of time. Subsequently, going on to resilience and digital transformation focus, we have had companies like IBM, Intel, and Google come to us about 20 years ago and plus, as well as the Army, Navy, Air Force CIOs, as well as Air Force Research Lab CIOs following our practices. And we also had the good fortune of leading, advising National Science Foundation on 32 expert panels of computer scientists pioneering US national innovations in cyber computing and cybersecurity, going back about 20 years. Therefore, over 30 years, having acquired the top 3 IT certifications, which are recommended by the Department of Defense CIO's office, and having served as the instructor and trainer for State University of New York, where I also had the privilege and honor of being ranked as the top pen tester and hacker earlier. I also had the opportunity to advance the state of New York's top digitized county as a CSO expert in recent years, following up by this advising and building practices at the New York State Cybersecurity conferences and Princeton conferences, amongst others. When we look at some of these nice schematics of the AI, machine learning, and so forth. We see on forums like LinkedIn, there are 4,000 likes on many of these schematics, which are high-level schematics. They're nice pictures, and they're useful. But I think the real risk lies under the hood. Starting with the first 20 years in building global financial systems and worldwide systems and networks deployed worldwide across Silicon Valley, Wall Street, and by global financial systems firms. Over the last 10 to 12 years, we have focused on the systems under the hood. Specifically, the focus is on why systems fail, going back on to our R&D, which has been ranked amongst Nobel Prize winners in artificial intelligence and quantitative methods in finance, and advancing beyond that in building practices to devise means for developing robust technological network systems, as well as building strategies for understanding why such failures would occur from a penetration testing and hacking perspective. Though we have been focusing on the electromagnetic spectrum for the last 8-10 years, and as you see on this slide, we have focused on them as the invisible risks, risks which underlie everything, every machine, every device out there, but often are not observed by most individuals, since those are latent in zero-day defects. If you have heard of specific things like spectrum or meltdown attacks, those are some of the attacks which result of things like buffer overflows and so forth in the semiconductor chips. And the challenge for most of the IT data centers and IT users and IT managers is, what would you do if overnight you discover a zero-day in all the machines or most of the machines which are powering your data centers or powering your users? You might have hundreds of machines, thousands of machines. So that's one example. But the challenge is these attacks over the last 10, 20 years have grown exponentially. Going back to the first presentation we were invited to give to Silicon Valley venture capitalists and CEOs, which we titled Building Global Digital Enterprises on the Wild, Wild Web. 25 years ago, no one could have imagined the web would be so wild today. And that's where basically we are seeing the kind of threats and vulnerabilities which are exponentially higher in terms of bringing down national and global enterprises, economies, as well as institutions, the largest institutions. But they are getting much less limelight compared to the Y2K bug and the Pentium bug, which we saw in the last century. Now, coming from that background, where I had the opportunity of investing a couple of thousand hours, breaking all kind of systems ethically in darknets for the state of New York, and building up the practices on adversarial uncertainty and adversarial risk management from a hacker's perspective, going on to train ethical hackers, penetration testers for the state. In the recent months, I've invested about 500 to 1,000 hours similarly in the cloud computing practices, being immersed there, often clocking marathon sessions of AWS network partners across the world, across time zones, sometimes spending 24 hours or 36 hours at a stretch. Therefore, many of these sessions you see here have focused on advanced security, AI, machine learning, deep learning, advanced analytics, data lakes, containers, IoT, Microsoft and VMware workloads, advanced migration, focus on AI, analytics, and security, as well as advanced well-architected CAF, which is cloud adoption frameworks and operational model frameworks. And the focus is how do we build the next generation of well-architected frameworks as an accredited AWS partner and a migration ambassador. The focus has been on management and governance, which is agility or resilience. Traditionally, most companies had a challenge between their developers wanting to innovate faster, get new innovations into practice, causing digital disruption and transformation. On the other hand, the management and governance issues were about control, compliance, and so forth. The challenge was, how can we achieve both of them? And based on what we see in today's technology platforms, that vision is feasible at this point of time. Therefore, we'll focus on what are the current cloud computing platforms and how to best build enterprise cloud computing. This is a focus based on today's focus on how you can implement well-architected cloud computing. Now, the focus on why you can find more in Appendix D, as I mentioned earlier. Therefore, we start with the first thing, which is most dear to most of us here, security. The AWS and Amazon as an enterprise, they consider security as job zero. Job zero means it gets priority over even priority 1, 2, 3, 4. It is the highest priority they have. And if you look back at our 2016 New York State Cybersecurity Conference, we have already focused on exponentially increasing vulnerabilities, risks, and threats, which are not only threatening the digital and cryptocurrencies as well as the digital virtual economies. And we have focused on why we need to assume breach. And in the context of the crypto apocalypse, which we highlighted with specific examples and cases of these vulnerabilities, threats, risks mentioned here. Our 2015 CSO-CRO keynote to Fortune 100 US leaders similarly focused on the enterprise-wide model risk management, understanding of vulnerabilities, threats, and risk mitigation. And simultaneously, our pen testing ethical hacking workshop at the New York State Engineering Technology Conference built the foundation for the risk Journal of Operational Risk paper there, advancing the industry standards as well as the educational standards in cybersecurity. The focus on assessing risk is very, very critical. And the challenge here is many people often know of what gets measured, gets managed. But often what gets disregarded, what gets mismeasured, gets mismanaged. And on that context, we have been leading worldwide and national practices with the industry presentations and keynotes, advancing the practices for the world's largest risk management associations, financial analyst associations, as well as the world's largest investment banks, as well as the US regulator of insurance organizations countrywide. Though we focus on the NIST risk engineering, and over the last 20, 25 years, we have seen NIST catching up to our focus on risk management in terms of the combined focus on agility and resilience, which we have built going back to the beta version of the first web browser. And these are the specific standards-based approaches where I think NIST is still catching up, where we have been building practices in issues like continuous implementation, continuous delivery and deployment, infrastructure as code, quantum uncertainty, time-space complexity, and model risk management and model risk arbitrage. But for today, we will be focusing more on the basics of cyber risk management, where we focus on identifying, protecting, detecting, responding, and recovery. And the CIA triad, which most of us are familiar with, you will find it its in-depth focus in my prior presentations and papers. And the primary focus here is we build zero trust based on a layer defense in depth approach. Now, we have seen such approaches applied in practices in conventional organizations, on-prem environments, with the legacy cloud environments. But I think we need to move to the latest cloud computing where we can have real zero trust and real network segmentation. Now, to briefly, cloud computing, as all of us know, is basically accessing computing, networking, and storage services on demand, just like a utility. And just like we access electric power, similarly, the question is, why don't we access computing to any scale, any scope for global reach, and so forth? And the idea here is, how do we get beyond the overhead in the data and IT resources, which is bogging us down, but not contributing to the bottom line? Therefore, we focus on the advancement of companies in cloud. We are seeing about 7 to 10% companies already in cloud and cloud native, and we are anticipating about 15 to 20% over the next few years. Many of the companies in on-prem have already been dipping their toe and advancing in the hybrid mode, where I believe about 85% companies are operating in this mode, about 50% spanning premises and hybrid modes. The advantages of cloud, many of us know, are we can have better costs, economies of scale, capacity, speed, agility, and global reach. And we're going to look at some of these services, which you can see in a disaggregated mode when we look at these services on the cloud in terms of compute, networking, storage, database security, and management and governance. McKinsey has focused on some studies and is suggesting a $1 trillion valuation, but based on our focus, we are anticipating much more substantial increase, given most computing in the future is anticipated to be cloud computing for any resilience and agility combinations. Therefore, many boards have still to catch up. And the focus, basically, we are seeing is not only a strategic focus on innovation, differentiation, and ensuring that you don't get disrupted, but also on risk and compliance and financial impact. And the focus is also on the operating model, as we'll see in a minute, with specific strategy drivers being what we have shown earlier is in innovation, speed, agility, scalability, and reducing risk. Risk is a key component, as we see in most of these places. And we see there are cloud native companies which can have a faster migration to the clouds and the most advanced modern cloud architectures. And there are others who have to take a slightly less fast approach based on the legacy architectures. And the challenge often is how do they balance their current data architectures on-prem with the cloud, and that's where the migration is happening right now. But if we look back 20 years earlier, we saw the similar thing in BPR when business process reengineering and transformation after the World Wide Web resulted in fundamental transformation and virtualization of global enterprises and governments, in which I had the opportunity of leading and advising US and worldwide governments and some of the largest companies and consulting firms. Therefore, what we are seeing here, as we see in this McKinsey's curve, is the investment. In the beginning, you need greater investment since you want parallel modes, both on-prem as well as on cloud, as you are in the process of migrating there. But the same thing in terms is known by the cloud providers in terms of what's called a migration bubble. This is the chasm which many companies have to cross to see the paybacks and the optimization after that. The challenge here is if they do nothing, what will happen? I think the curve here, which is showing no growth or do nothing, it's a slightly increasing cost. But I think if you realistically assess based on our analysis, which we have shared in this presentation and prior presentations, which are referenced in the appendices, you will observe that you might be at the risk of disruption, if not being adversarially terminated. Those are major risks which need to be factored into your considerations. Therefore, those risks are reflected there in terms of things like cyber risks and execution risks and so forth. But the challenge here is how do we build a holistic view of risk? And that's where most of our frameworks, which we have built over the last 25, 30 years, can help you build such a holistic view. In terms of the migration strategies, there's a lift and shift, which is called rehost. That means you take your current enterprise from on-prem to the cloud, map it one-on-one, carrying on the underutilized, misutilized capacities, capabilities, and the lack of integration and streamlining and innovation, which is feasible in cloud, but has not been in the on-prem data centers. And I think the risk-averse strategy is that we can't really go to the modernization aggressive approach of refactoring, where you want to have containers and microservices immediately, but you need a transition from rehosting to refactoring, as it is called, through replatforming, where you start with the rehosting, moving your services one-on-one, then you start changing your services from hosted services to managed services. And then you advance to serverless services, where you are focusing less on the infrastructure and more on the business performance and business innovation, digital transformation, and digital disruption. And the focus in the operating model, as we're going to see, has to shift from projects to products. And in that sense, the cloud operating model from the AWS can help you transition your teams, your organizations, and related mindsets. Therefore, although cloud computing is a very much a technological enterprise, but the role of humans and peoples and teams cannot be understated, which is, I think, is more critical based on our R&D and practices going back 30 years, which the observation which is in sync with the observations by AWS and Amazon practitioners based on hundreds of thousands of case studies of real customers. So we need to go through the migration bubble to cost optimizing and modernizing, refactoring using CICD and so forth. And how do we make sure that this journey can be expedited by minimizing risk and maximizing the outcomes? That's what we are focusing on today. And the focus is built on innovation flywheel and data flywheel. And there are various projections out there, $1 trillion projections and so forth, as we shared. And one thing which we need to focus on, the cloud model, I believe, is the most important paradigm shift since the invention of the internet. And the various advantages we have mentioned earlier, they are on this chart. And we are seeing a focus on increasing cloud adoption with increasing importance of cloud financial management. and cloud economics skills, which most companies need to build and the boards need to catch up. Simultaneously, we are observing some of the largest worldwide organizations moving on to cloud from hybrid modes and so forth. And simultaneously, we are observing more awareness about the threats which the cloud poses, as well as the platform nature of the cloud, where the cloud is a network not only of the provider, but also of the various customers as well as suppliers, which are organized into a network. That, in one sense, is the notion of a network-centered computing, in addition to some more details you will find in our presentations in the appendix. Therefore, companies as well as technology and service providers that do not catch up, they will fall behind. That's a general observation from Gartner, other companies on which we agree with them. And we see, based on the data, that we have these 4 companies. Now, these 4 companies are not strangers to us. Going back to the early days of the internet, as I mentioned, the Amazon AWS presentation I was seeing at Silicon Valley Bank, where I was invited to guide venture capitalists and CEOs by the world's largest angel investor organization. Bill Gates, Microsoft founder and CEO, was one of the early adopters who had recommended our ventures, not only on his corporate homepage, but also in his book. Google had come to us for digital transformation just before its IPO. And IBM, which is listed on a different slide, they came to us as pioneers of knowledge management in 1998. And therefore, looking at these particular companies, our focus is on agile development, rapid deployment, focusing again on the 4 key attributes where most consensus is there. This is not only in increasing resiliency, agility, but also in performance and cost savings. That's what you're going to see time and again across many of these slides, which you're going to discuss here. And you can see cost optimization strategy, which can leverage not only the pricing model based, this is the cloud financial management, cloud economics based, and the focus on the right sizing of cloud resources. This is very critical. The optimization of the computing resources and the network and database and other resources, which your on-prem center is not able to match to what is feasible in the cloud. In addition to the on-demand or elastic cloud usage, where you can have almost infinite scalability with global reach feasible without any delay and a much lower cost. Simultaneously, you can get 70% to 90% discount on many of these particular features like excess capacity, which you'll see in a minute. And you can advance to serverless computing by advancing beyond your reliance upon the IT infrastructures and all the vulnerabilities underlying it, which are now the responsibility of the provider instead of your staff and employees. Now, as you see, I mentioned earlier, the 65% of cloud spend is related to contract-based pricing and using excess capacity. That is where the discounts are being seen in terms of 70 to 90% and so forth. We have seen some comparison across many of these cloud providers. Now we can compare service to service, but I would recommend, instead of comparing service to service, which you can also see from this page, which I have shared here from Google Cloud, focus on the bigger picture. Focus on the journey, which may start with traditional data warehousing, or maybe you are at data warehouse modernization phase, or maybe you already progressed to the data lakes on one of the cloud computing providers. But focus on what the data can do for you in terms of value added, instead of sucking up the time and resources which are being used for upgrading, managing, and patching all of your data center and related resources. And the focus is on basically here, how do we have smart intelligence which can help you build real value for business? And focusing on data, what we observe here, basically data needs to be understood in terms of migrating beyond suboptimal RDBMS like data warehouses and so forth to data lake architecture, which can provide much more seamless, integrated, much more cost optimal, efficient, and global experience in terms of data driven values, not in terms of interacting with various services which you can relate and provide to, as well as apply here, some of them shown here, but also in terms of its movement back and forth and also across the services. Now, there are claims which I see here in terms of AWS, from AWS, in providing the broadest and deepest portfolio of such value-adding capabilities from their lakehouse architecture. And they state here that it's the most scalable data lakes, purpose-built analytics, unified governance, best performance at the lowest cost. I would recommend put their feet to fire and go check it out. Do the benchmarking and see for yourself if you can actually do so. Based on my experience spanning 500 to 1,000 hours, which started with looking at all these 4 different providers around the beginning of the year in a very deep systematic way, and finally focusing on AWS in much greater depth, I tend to be in sync with what they observe here. Just in terms of the capabilities and technologies which they are not only trying to sell to the providers, but on which they have built the world's largest e-commerce machine, Amazon.com, which is built on these services like the Amazon S3, which they have built, or the Amazon DynamoDB, which is a non-relational database which can scale to the web and so forth. So data lakehouse is now officially a thing, and we need to scratch beyond the surface, much more deeper, what you're going to see here beyond many of the reports such as these. And these services are evolving at a very rapid pace. Therefore, I would recommend you to actually go see it. Not only see it, but do it, apply it, and actually experience in joining one of these serverless data lake days, where you can almost have zero cost experience in getting the experience with the latest technologies, where you can see what's the hype and what's the reality, and you can benchmark for yourself. Therefore, you will see that traditionally we had diverse kind of skill sets across the whole data transformation and data value creation journey, right from ingestion cleaning, the ETL, ELT, across to security and privacy and compliance, on to actual actionable insights, data-driven actionable insights, as many of us call, and the term, I believe, which we coined going back 25 years. Therefore, now based on what AWS Lake Formation offers for a secure data lake, you can see it offers a much more streamlined, low cost, low skill, low code, no code approach built around many of the services they have. And we look at many of these services like they have in terms of systems in networks of networks. Therefore, we think of data, computer, storage, network security as various subsystems of large-scale network systems which interact, integrate, work together in a very streamlined fashion, which I would say you need to see in these specific cases to admire the state of technology which is available now. Going further, you also need to see the power of blue crawlers, where you do not need to actually store data or actually build tables, but you can actually build, draw data from caches at a very high speed. You can convert data from the traditional formats to columnar formats, which are much more geared to very fast speed, $1 trillion records per unit of time levels of analysis, in addition to high level encryption and compression schemes, which are feasible now. Though we see data analytics portfolio, data being at the center of this value equation, from data movement to infrastructure management, analytics to visualization, we observe many of these services at various levels, which are feasible and available right now for you to apply and use to see the power of these services. In addition, you need to also understand and observe how integrated is security, control, compliance with these services at a very fundamental level, which we're going to discuss in a bit later. There are a lot of benefits coming from the data lakes, more so in terms of the various analytical services, so that your diverse kind of people with diverse needs, right from data analysts to the business analysts and so forth, data scientists, engineers, all can be served from the same array of services in different combinations. The question here is, again, we need to ask, how can we achieve the agility and resilience for the greatest business value in terms such as scalability, innovation, global reach at lowest relative cost on a sustainable basis? So we look at advancing beyond what to how. We discuss some technologies and we're going to look at them in slightly more depth. We looked at the data lakehouse architecture, and I will focus now on the integration of AI and also focus more on the security compliance at a very fundamental level of the basic building blocks to the highest levels. Therefore, many of these various technologies and services, including the architectures and frameworks I shared with you before briefly, now I will try to share with you in the next few slides with enough details in the appendices so that you can use this as a reference for advancing your cloud computing practices. Going further, the notion of this AWS and the other clouds is they focus on this well-architected frameworks. What are well-architected frameworks? Basically, these are the best practices they're derived from hundreds of thousands of customers based on actual case studies focused on what they actually do. The workloads, basically, you can think of in terms of the resources that are utilized and code that is applied to generate the business value. The question here is how we can combine these both, learn, measure, and improve to create the greatest business value. AWS has been a pioneer in well-architected frameworks. And the question is, why do we need well-architected frameworks? You build, deploy faster, lower mitigate risks, make informed decisions. And there are, what is shown here are 7 pillars of well-architected practices: operational excellence, security, reliability, performance efficiency, cost optimization, sustainability. Many of them are integrated, and you will see that they connect with each other across the board. Therefore, we'll look at them briefly. You can go beyond guessing your capacity needs to having infinite scalability at your fingertips with global reach. You can test your production systems, innovation, dev test at production scale with real environments instead of the fragmented environments in the dev test deploy, which you may have currently in the current environments. Simultaneously, you can have the ability to run your workloads effectively, continuously improve by innovating and advancing beyond hosted to managed to serviceless architectures, while increasing your innovation with greater cost optimization. The same thing is about the refining your operations, security operations process as code, as everything is code here in the AWS framework. Reliability, this is critical here. Everything fails all the time. We need to build systems that embrace failure as a natural occurrence. This is the most crucial thing which I think is critical here. Have you designed your systems for recovery, automatic recovery from failure? That's most critical as you compare and benchmark your systems. These are some examples like chaos engineering with specific examples where you can simulate actual failures and see how robust your systems are and so forth. Security is job zero. We've seen that. And workload, you can create workloads with permissioning, access policies, and logging at different levels of groups, at roles level, at security level, at resource level, and various integrations thereof. And you can implement a strong foundation of identity so that user access control issues, which I found one of the most critical basis for vulnerabilities across most networks in some of the state environments, those can be addressed with much greater confidence by also ensuring traceability and defense in depth, as well as ensuring data is protected in transit and processing and rest. Therefore, we look at many of these zero trust in terms of not only the identity, but access control, least privilege, with zero being the default privilege, separation of duties, defense in depth, and network segmentation with real network segmentation visible here across the layers as shown in this schematic, in contrast to many award-winning unified threat systems which you might have deployed, which were award-winning network segmentation, zero trust, but everything you had to do from the ground up once you put them into your networks. Though we are seeing many kind of detective controls which can detect, monitor alarms and corrective actions, and you can automate your security in terms of MLOps, DevSecOps with using version templates. Config rules, for instance, can provide continuous compliance all the time automatically. Cloud Trail, which is the auditing trail, which provides who did, when, what, where, which, everything, every call is an API call. And therefore, in that sense, everything which is being tracked through Cloud Trail, through the VPC logs, and through the other endpoint network logs, everything moment-to-moment activity is being tracked in these terms across the networks and provide not only detection and response, but prevention. Therefore, in such cases, we can have various services, which such as Amazon Macy, which can identify PII, for instance. You can have Amazon Detective, which can analyze trillions of events from various sources like flow logs, CloudTrail, GuardDuty. Performance efficiencies, how do you adapt to change? This is very critical here. Sometimes you have spikes in demand. Sometimes with the DDoS attacks, you need more resources to scale so that your services continue uninterrupted at the lowest cost and the greatest resilience. And those things are feasible, as evident from the case studies of real companies with global footprints, which you're going to see on AWS websites here. Similarly, you have to democratize advanced technologies with the cheaper, better, faster than anything else out there. I would advise you sincerely to benchmark all of these services with the other providers, but make sure you have the CFM knowledge, the cloud economics knowledge, so that you are not only focusing on the costs, but the value which is being generated. Because most often we just focus on costs and may disregard the value. And value creation is the imperative, which is critical for differentiation, disruption, and surviving in the post-COVID era. Therefore, going further, such value has to be understood not only in terms of returns, but also risks. And risks are core to everything, including every foundational framework, including the well-architected framework, including the cloud adoption framework. Therefore, one needs to understand risks and the holistic view of risks to ensure that you are not blindsided to such risks, and you may lose your enterprise, your jobs, and your legacies. Therefore, how do you identify significant risks? That is where high to medium risks focus is designed into the planning, provisioning, deployment of the AWS architectures. And you can look at various pillars which we saw of the well-architected architectures, looking at the biggest risk prioritization in collaboration with customers, helping them understand, rank the risks, and see how those risks can be addressed in a very high confidence manner, so that the risk sharing between customers and the provider here can be understood and applied across the hybrid mode, the managed services mode, as well as the service mode. More importantly, the data belongs to customers, and customers have a complete access as well as responsibility for their data. Going further, looking at actual case studies from some of the sources here, more available on the Amazon website, you can see the possibilities of going cloud native, resulting in 100 times faster deployment of features once you go into the microservices containers mode, 1,000+ applications which you can deploy, and modernizing everything, achieving multi-100% growth and so forth. The challenge here is the governance and agility, and we look at some of the foundational schemes here, where we are looking at the focal points of account security and cost management. All these things are addressed in a very integrated and cohesive manner by automation of policies, identities, and accounts automation, right from the get-go, where you define the organizational hierarchy with budget and cost management integrated in it by automating compliance, along with automating the budgeting, security, and so forth, and building the drivers of your resilience, agility, performance, and costs journey, which you have from enabling to provisioning to operating. Through that journey, basically, you can have the services which are available in terms of the accounting, the multi-factor authentication, but more so in terms of the organizational level, multi-account focus, where you can generate multiple accounts using the control tower and landing zones, using the account factory, where you can provision hundreds to thousands of servers at the same time and migrate them with specific preventive and detective guardrails, which are established, as you see across some of these charts here, the integration of the core technologies with other technologies, and the preventive and detective guardrails in terms of the various capabilities, and driven by templates like JSON, YAML, Terraform templates, which are pervasive there to achieve compliance, to achieve provisioning for the developers in a highly compliant way, using preventive guardrails deployed as code, as well as detective guardrails deployed as code. The focus is how do you manage go on concurrently to enable provision and operate. You have multiple solutions available, and you can see again the same, some sets of services which scan this whole horizon. Simultaneously, in terms of security, you see the gamut of services which span the networking, the identity, governance, compliance, and encryption. Now, in the AWS frameworks, AI ML is highly integrated with all these technologies which provide the agility and resilience. Therefore, it is worthwhile to focus on the AI machine learning, containers, and CICD for modernization, for agility, and so forth. We have given you details in this appendix B, but some capabilities we want to review here. Currently, AI stack, which you can use at AWS, provides the largest span of no-code, low-code capabilities, which you see under AI services. You also have some interactive development environments, as well as the AI ML modeling environments, which are industry benchmarks, as well as if you have experts who want to delve into the TensorFlow, PyTorch, and other frameworks, there are much hands-on resources available to them. The ML pipeline goes from data prep to model building, training to deployment monitoring. And we have all these services across cataloging, search to protection, security, access, ingestion, so forth, spanning not only the various elastic or infinitely scalable services which you can use from AWS, but also if you're using something like Kubernetes, you can deploy them in a very streamlined fashion, similar to what you can do with various VMS workloads, SAP workloads, and Microsoft workloads. In terms of the ECR, you've got a fully managed container registry, ECR, fully managed container orchestration platform, ECS, as well as the AWS Fargate, which is a serverless operation model. And you can also run managed Kubernetes here. Therefore, you can achieve the modernization, which is often associated with things like Kubernetes, containers, Dockers, CICD, and so forth. And you can achieve agility while ensuring governance. Therefore, you can build a contact center and actually do it. That's what I recommend. And I've given you a link there. Actually go test it out, build it out, see how these technologies you can apply hands-on. And you see how easy and intuitive it is for most people to do. Therefore, this is the technology which powers Amazon and Amazon Prime, which they had built for themselves. And now it's available for you to go and kick tires and see how you can deploy it. And you can see actual companies, many of the names which you will recognize, already using these technologies to build the contact centers. Additionally, the cloud adoption framework is critical, which recognizes the people side and the technology side. People is business people, governance, and technology is platform security operations. There are various kind of metrics and indicators. Everything is science here. The art of envisioning, aligning, launching, scaling cloud becomes a science when they go into building execution plans by helping the customers brainstorm and ensuring that they can have various perspectives, various measures, various scorecards and metrics, which can not only help reduce risk, but grow revenue and operational efficiency. And there's tons of tools out there, which are short form questionnaires, long form questionnaires. But basic idea here is they help you kind of brainstorm, prioritize the various risks and challenges. And often these challenges are non-technical. And they can help you compress your migration bubbles and cycles and have a very systematic and planned journey across the migration bubbles, because you need to have a thoroughly planned, tested provisioning migration journey, because any of those failures can result in failure of migration. There are many tools which can help you actually estimate the migration and run costs and so forth at various levels of depth and analysis, which you can do before the migration, while doing the migration, and post-migration to see actually what you have achieved. Cost optimization, here is what I mentioned here. You can mix and match the discounted, reserved, spot, and on-demand services. Some of these headlines which talk about these features here. You can transform your business, agility, resilience, cost efficiency, and performance efficiency as you transition across a journey from the hosted to hybrid managed to serviceless environments. Therefore, you can focus on the strategic differentiation where your productivity would go up, including agility, resilience, as well as cost savings and revenues, while reducing your undifferentiated heavy lifting, which might be bogging you down in terms of your data centers, which require continuous maintenance. So we focused on some of these things here, and many of the things which we are discussing here, they are beyond the focus of NIST currently. Quantum uncertainty, time-space complexity, these we discussed in the last New York State Cybersecurity Conference. Someday NIST is going to tackle those things, but you can apply those things right now and gain the benefits based on our frameworks, which have been applied already in industry practices. Similarly, in the CICD, IAC, this presentation with AWS will provide you much greater depth than NIST is doing. It is still in the process of building these CICD, IAC standards for the cloud. The model risk management, model risk arbitrage, those are critical, because all your algorithms and data, they're running on models, all AML, and model risk is key, but we are yet to see NIST approach that. And we have been the pioneers in leading, guiding worldwide practices across the financial industry as well as others. So going back about 25, 30 years, we focused on dynamic uncertainty, beyond prediction, and we saw our network early adopters like Goldman Sachs applying those. Subsequently, we have focused on model risk management and arbitrage with presentations at Princeton, already being picked up by many of the hedge funds and other companies. And our last presentation focused on the adversarial uncertainty and quantum uncertainty with time-space complexity focus, which is applied at Pentagon. Focus again, governance and agility, And this is what we have achieved today. And this is a journey for the last 30 years. And it's been a privilege. And I would recommend you just go do it, see for yourself. And again, I thank you for being here. Thank you for your time.